Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about the new season of Torchlight Infinite, the City of Eterna. For people who don't know this game, this is basically a very fast-paced ARPG that I've, at this point, probably played for around about 1,000 hours over the last 4 leaks. It's definitely something you could overlook as a mobile-style ARPG, but trust me when I say this has a lot more depth to it than you think on first glance. And well, they just revealed the release date for the new league cycle, which is going to be on September 7th. And I gotta say, I'm incredibly stunned as somebody who usually gives feedback to some of the games that they play. Devs often ask for feedback in like a sheet or whatever. It is incredible how much of that feedback they actually take and implement into the main game. And honestly, this game just seems to keep getting better and better and better over leaks. So I'm really stoked about that. And let's get into everything that's going to change this league. All right, so they basically revealed that the new league mechanic that is going to be in every map is going to be this sort of monolith. We don't know too much about it, but apparently you're going to build your own city with that monolith, kind of like finding, for example, in PoE, incursions in maps and then building your own temple. Now, there's obviously going to be more Tetris. It wouldn't be Torchlight if there wasn't more and more Tetris. And the way I understand it is you place these blocks, you build your city layout, and whenever you touch these reward tiles, those you can farm while you're in that city. Sounds pretty simple and fun. You interact with something in maps, and then you build your own city, and you get rewards, right? Now, there is also a new passive tree for the rewards. Obviously, it wouldn't be an ARPG if there's a passive tree for everything. I can't even be sarcastic about this. I absolutely love it. Then there's also going to be a new boss. If you've never really bossed in Torchlight, these are extremely hard encounters. They are no joke. So I expect this something to be of that nature, like a 20-minute fight where you have to dodge like 100,000 times, which is going to be pretty fun, at least to do once. Most likely, I'm not really good enough to farm this over and over, and I'm just going to buy the boss uniques, but in general, the boss looks pretty awesome. Now, there are also soul candles. Now, what soul candles seem to be is basically customizable items that are in the game for this league or for longer. I'm not really sure if they're going to be account bound, but the way they're going to work is to have basically stats to enhance your character, so it's just more item slots, and they are going to be combinable with each other, so kind of like recombinators. And it's going to keep stats from one kind of randomly, so you can find them, and if you only like one of the mods, you can hope it combines with a better one. Very interesting, but we'll have to see. Now, then we saw the release of the new character that you can play, which is called Iris, or how I call her Space Mom. She's going to be on the Battle Pass. Now, she's going to revolve around the Spirit Magi's that we already have in the game, but she's going to basically supercharge them, making her another interesting choice for minion builds. Now, a lot of the mechanics that I saw in the patch notes that she has seem pretty vague, so it's going to be one of those heroes that we will really have to play to see how strong they are. With heroes like this, it's usually either they're going to be completely broken and maybe fixed mid-league, we don't know, or they're going to be pretty bad. The second release, though, and probably the hero trait that I will be starting, is Frostfire Gemra's new fire class, which is called Flame of Pleasure. Now, I've looked through the patch notes a little bit because she looked completely busted when she was revealed, and seems like in the patch notes, she's just as busted as I thought. She basically has this effect around her, which is kind of like a righteous fire, and it feels like she's going to deal a lot of single target damage, but can also clear very well. So what's going to happen is you can probably just swap around as you want, depending on the situation. If that is true, and you actually get all those multipliers on top of each other, this might be incredibly broken. As for what skill we're going to use, I'm not 100% sure. Fire skills are not the best, right? But there's still Firebolt. There's definitely Flame Slash, which is actually one of the best. We'll have to see. Now, they also talk about rebalancing some uniques, introducing some new uniques, which are probably going to drop from the boss. But on top of that, they're also going back to older classes and revamping them, or at least buffing them. Some of these revamps seem pretty OP, which some of these classes desperately needed. Just to show you, the classes who got buffed are Carino, Ranger of Glory, which definitely needed a buff. Yuga Spacetime Illusion, I thought was pretty strong, but I'm really happy that it's buffed. It basically makes a copy of yourself. It's, in my opinion, one of the most fun classes in the game. It's basically like a spellcaster that has a perma Mirage Archer around yourself. It's incredible to play. Carino Lethal Flash, I'm not really sure what they're going to do with that. It had some niches, but wasn't very strong otherwise. And Space-Time Elapse definitely needed the help as well. Now, the crafting changes are quite interesting, and I'm just going to read this from the patch notes, because the video is, I think, a little bit confusing on that. So basically, crafting in Torchlight used to be very easy. It took a long time, but you could get to everything you kind of wanted. Sort of like Harvest in Path of Exile. Last league, they made that a lot worse. So you would just get worse items overall, which wasn't really a problem because every league introduced new sort of items to get back your power. But the crafting system itself just felt really bad. It felt like you're getting constantly punished for trying to get tier 0 gear and getting your GG gear, which should not be the case anymore. And it might actually be a little bit too strong, but let's talk about that. So they will make it a lot easier to get up to 4 affixes, maybe even 5 affixes. Maybe not the perfect item, but instead of having to hope to get some upgrades from the ground or having to buy it, being kind of solo self-found seems a lot more realistic now. So the currency you use to craft on your items is plasticity. Depending on how high level an item is, you get more and more plasticity, and that's basically what you use to influence your item. And that will now not be used up anymore in the first stage of crafting. It will basically only be used once you're kind of min-maxing the item. Now, a really big change here as well is that you don't have like 2 stages of crafting anymore where you have to do the so-called prototype crafting to get your first mods, then lock them in, and then do target processing. You now can do both kind of at will, which is interesting because some of these make it so you remove affixes, so you can kind of recraft them maybe. I'm not 100% sure, but they do give you the option now to actually craft from tier 1 to tier 0. But that will also remove another affix from an equipment. So I'm not even sure if this is going to be that strong. I'm not sure how big the difference is from tier 1 to tier 0, but definitely an interesting choice. Might lead to a lot of RNG. In general, I think this is mostly a win. They also removed some of the crafting materials, which will make it a lot less confusing. But once again, it's impossible for me to know just from these few lines how this will actually play out. I think overall, though, this will be a huge improvement over last league. Now, the next thing they did is give us buffs to armor and evasion and defenses in general. So what Torchlight went through is something that, for example, Path of Exile also went through. Back in the day on softcore, most builds, a lot of builds just went acro, phase acro, very squishy, because there was just not really a feasible way to still feel good, have good damage, and also get defenses on top, which meant you had a huge divide between hardcore and softcore. Nowadays, we know that softcore looks a lot more similar to hardcore in that it also has some defensive layers, right, in order to feel good, and that's because they are easier to get, right? They are just like more convenient to get, I would say. So they changed armor and evasion big time. Armor used to be weaker and weaker depending on how big the hit was, which is the same as in PoE, and that got removed. Basically, it is now just a percentage thing, which will help a lot against some of these crazy bosses that just one-shot you over and over again. And I think this will make armor a lot more potent, depending on how much damage reduction it actually grants. But the way crazier change was that it doesn't just work against physical damage anymore, armor that is. It also works against elemental and erosion damage. I'm not really sure. My mind was a little bit blown when I read that. I'm not sure how this is not just going to be completely OP. Maybe they're going to adjust the numbers to a point where it's a lot more solid and not just completely broken. But armor stackers are looking quite crazy. Also, I'm not 100% sure how this will work because elemental and erosion damage already has resistances, right? So now you get resistances, and on top of that, you can reduce it even further, the damage even further, which I don't know how that's going to work. Are you just going to be like near immune against those damage types, or are they going to up the damage so you need to get armor? I'm not sure. Now, the second thing that they did is to evasion. Evasion also was a little bit too niche for how they built it into the game. It only worked against attack damage, and now it also works against spells, at least to an extent. So there was already a talent for that, right? A lot of evasion builds took that because it was very strong. Spell damage is very, very spooky, but that is now just baseline there, which frees up a lot of those options for those builds, not having to go for that talent. And I'm not really sure what the rest of the defense will really mean. We'll have to see. But in general, I think this is a really good thing. I kind of hate these games where you just go full damage, which is what Torchlight kind of used to be. There wasn't really much value of stacking defenses. It was better to just run through and just hope you don't get hit. But this now will, I think, build a way better groundwork for an interesting all-rounder character. But the by far biggest overhaul is here at the end, and that is for Endgame. And that is, if you don't know, Torchlight Infinite's Endgame, you also run maps. There's a lot of bosses you can run. But the shtick here is that you have a deck that you can build with cards that basically make you stronger. Think of it as sort of like an Atlas passive tree. And the way you used to do these is you have to actually do a map where that card is placed on, and then you get that card for a certain amount of next maps, right? And you could kind of stack and stack and stack effects. But now what they did is straight up say, okay, we're going to rebalance all of these cards, and you just get all of the effect from the get-go, which is a very clever change, because usually you could stack for 5 rounds, right? That's how long a round counted, and after that, everything gets reshuffled. But your first map, not juicy at all, right? Second map gets a little bit juicier because those cards stack on top of each other. Now, all of the maps are going to be a lot more equalized. However, there still are cards, and those are now going to be chaos cards. So what that means is, overall, your loot will be a lot more streamlined. You won't have these absurd RNG spikes, but you can still get those RNG spikes from chaos cards if you get lucky on top. So overall, you're going to farm a lot more currency. I'm not really sure how they're going to rebalance that. It seems kind of crazy on first sight. But after seeing everything they did here, I do trust them. I think they did an awesome job with all of these changes. But yeah, so, all right, all cards affect you now. Only the chaos cards will now change the maps afterwards. So that's kind of like the random RNG element that will keep it fresh. Now, what you can see in the background is compasses. You can now actually purchase them from the vendor for 3 FEs, which means that there's not going to be a situation where, for example, Huntress is going to be ultra expensive because of certain uniques that certain people need, right? This is basically a cap. If it's more expensive than that on the auction house, you might as well buy it here. So they're basically capping how valuable some of these are, which after last league, I'm really happy about, because I made a strat with Huntress and it just shot through the roof. Like, it got like ×3 as expensive, which I think is going to be a huge balancing tool. There's also going to be new tiers of maps. So one of the biggest things about time marks, right? Time mark 1, 2, 3 gets harder progressively. What people said, and which I agree with, is Time Mark 7 and Time Mark 8 were a crazy jump in difficulty. Not just in terms of how much damage enemies dealt, but also just in terms of how much damage you had to deal. Like, we're talking, you can do tier 7 with like a few million damage, but if you're in tier 8s and you're not doing 100+ million damage, you're going to get completely stomped. And what they did is they kind of made it so there is sub time marks. So you can see right here that Time Mark 7 has 3 offset degrees, which basically make it a lot harder to do tier 7s, but they're not as hard as tier 8s, basically giving you a little bit more of a smoother progression. And on top of that, you can also do the same thing for Time Mark 8. You can go even higher than Time Mark 8 now. And on top of that, there's sort of like a deep space mode, which is kind of like hard mode, which kind of reminds me of Delirium in Path of Exile, which costs a certain amount of currency, and it will make your map even harder. So they're definitely pushing up the difficulty, which is a good thing because there is a lot of power creep in the game. A lot of the items that you had last league, the new item slots, like relics and stuff like that, they're just getting added on top of each other, and you just get more and more power, which it's good that we have something to farm with that. Now, another thing they did is they basically made it so you can drop fragments of unique items that if you have enough fragments, you can put them together. Sort of like divination cards in Path of Exile. For example, a Fiend Crown right here, you can farm it if you have 15 of those pieces. This will be a lot easier to acquire some of the very, very expensive uniques in this game, and is something that I think overall in Path of Exile was only upside, so I don't think it's going to be different, and I think it's a good addition. And then at the end, another request that a lot of community members had is improving the trading house. So basically what they did is exactly that. They added a lot of new stuff. You can read through it. I'll also link the video down in the description, obviously. But in general, I will say this about this patch. I think they did a great job of responding to the community's feedback, and I have a really hard time saying anything negative here. The only thing that I can really think of that might be negative is the crafting system. It might actually be too easy now to get some of the OP items, and it might go back to where it was. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. The game could get very power crapped if that happens. I'm not. That is the only criticism that I would really like even have here. I guess one thing that I have still in the top of my mind is the translation in this game can sometimes be sloppy. If you want to do your own builds, it can be quite distracting because some of the wording is not all that consistent. That is probably still going to be an issue. I don't know when that is going to be addressed. Maybe it is being addressed. I don't know. That is definitely a little bit of an annoyance. But otherwise, I'm really looking forward to this league on September the 7th. And yeah, I think that's going to be the perfect time to also jump into the game. And I'm probably going to make videos about it anyways, so you're going to see it on the channel whenever that happens in 2 weeks. For now, it's still going to be Path of Exile, obviously. But yeah, so if you want to try it out, free-to-play game, link is down in the description. And yeah, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.